All right, Paul. I saw this MIT lab study, Your Brain on ChatGPT, and it found the lowest brain engagement and lingering performance drops in the group that relied on ChatGPT. Did you see that one?
I did. Hey, Matt. Um, Everybody. It's a really, really, really interesting study, and I suspect that if if the world of AI goes in the direction that it looks like AI is going, we will either be talking and citing this study as a canary in a coal mine, or we'll be looking at it as a pile of as a pile of crap and an outlier and a terribly run study or something along those lines. But something this will be this I think will probably be a topic of conversation for years to come. It was an MIT Media Lab study. It was called "Your Brain on ChatGPT." It was shared around some of the socials so people might see it. I'll see if we can put a link to the study itself
Hmm.
in the
In the
show
show
notes. And
notes, yeah.
I'd rec- I'd recommend if you can, um, we'll include that link. Look at the study itself because some of the reporting on the study has been um, a little bit overblown, and some
Yeah.
of the reports on the studies have been a little bit inaccurate, as often is the case.
Hmm.
Um, but very briefly, small group, 54 participants, which is considered small for any of these types of studies.
Yeah.
Um, Split into a into groups, right? So now we're getting even smaller
Right,
smaller
right, right.
numbers when you think about it as well. But the groups were first group was using large language model type stuff, generative AI. Second, we're using search, and the third group were not using tools. And basically, it was looking at not just how they engaged with it and what they did, but also looking at what the impact was on how
Hmm.
their brains were functioning and how the brains were firing. And so this the results of this showed that the people that were using GPT had the what's known as the weakest neural connectivity, which in lay terms basically means that their brain was the least active.
Hmm.
And so this is concerning, right? Because as we all know, part of what keeps our brains healthy is using our brains,
Yeah, yeah.
and using our brains and challenging our brains to remain healthy. So this is one of the reasons why it created as much attention as it is, and you saw a lot of the reports were centered around, you know, is GPT making us stupid? Right,
Hmm. Hmm.
where a lot of the reports associated with it, and there was some evidence that there might be something worth looking at there.
Yeah, I mean, is there a bigger story here beyond AI?
Yeah, I think there is. And I've been spending some time thinking about it and taking a larger, kind of more historical view of this. Right? If you go back, 100 years, the vast majority of people were not doing work that was intellectually demanding in any way. And we were doing work that was helping the economy. We were doing work that was helping us, pay our bills and things like that. But if we wanted to exercise our brains, we had to, pick up a book and start reading it. So
Yeah.
the that has changed. It changed, relatively briefly, whereby there were opportunities to exercise your brains in all kinds of ways in the workplace. But now, with the advent of these types of tools, not just GPT, but other tools that are sort of issued as productivity tools, we might be kind of like flipping that pendulum back a little bit,
Hmm.
or at least we will be if we're not using them in really interesting ways and consciously providing value add on top. So I think the story here is um, don't assume that your brain is going to be exercised naturally by what you do. Um, think about how you can keep your brain active in a whole bunch of different ways. I had Bobby Hansen talking on the podcast a few weeks ago. He talked about games like video games and how helpful actually they can
Yeah.
be in that regard. But there are things we need to do anyway just to make sure that our brains are being kept active.
It's like working out, but for your brain. You know, you got to
Yeah,
keep
absolutely.
going, right? So you're like building that brain skill muscle basically in your brain.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, what would be a good example? Do you think work or real life for those skills um, in this context? You know?
Yeah. You mean sort of like what good example of what a skill muscle kind of is?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So, well, first off, the that muscle is the key term, right? So what we have figured out over, gosh, the last 4 or 5 years of our work is that analogy of these intangible things that we do at work, the things that kind of keep our brains active and so on. The best analogy is a muscle. And the reason why it's such a good analogy is because it functions in very much like a muscle. If you use it, it gets stronger. If you don't use it, it gets weaker. And I want people to really internalize that, because if you think about the work that you do on a day-to-day basis, it may or may not access that or access those skills, and
Hmm.
some of those
Yeah.
skills will be accessed more or exercised more if you do one kind of work, and exercise less if you do another kind of work. um, the outside of work example that I often use is if you've got an elderly relative and they live alone, and you go visit them and you're spending any good period of time with them, you will quickly notice that their ability to do like interpersonal communication, perhaps their ability to be able to pick up subtle signs,
Mm.
their emotional intelligence, their EQ, if you like,
Yeah.
kind of drifts a little bit. Why? Because they spend so much time living in their own shell. They talk to anybody, they're talking to themselves.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's an example of a muscle degrading because we're not using that muscle frequently. So whenever you are doing any sort of work, don't just think about what the work is, but think about how you're doing that work and how that equates to these various muscles and whether those muscles are being built or not being built.
Yeah. I wonder how much of the atrophy of that social engagement that we experienced through the pandemic is
Mhm.
back yet. You
Yeah.
know, like that
Well,
that killed a
actually, this
lot
is
of
a
that,
very
right?
interesting thing. Yeah, I love that as a question, right? Because um, there's multiple things at work here, right? So first off, we are spending um, less time now than we were before the pandemic in physical rooms with other people. That is still the case, regardless of back to office initiatives and so on. A bunch of people came back to the office. Everything's kind of stabilized now. So you're not hearing a lot about either return to office
Right, right,
or
right,
remote or hybrid work. It's why? Because the figures are kind of stable, right?
right.
And so, but even for people that have come back into the office, in many cases, they're working in highly distributed settings and they're talking to people that aren't even physically with them.
Yeah.
I know I've mentioned this previously on the podcast. We've encountered people, quite a few people, who go to the office every day and they aren't talking to anybody,
Anyone. Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so you're exactly right. This has shifted, and particularly this sort of social interaction stuff has atrophied. And because we are now in a situation where we've got the primary party that we're talking to is GPT or is another form of AI. It's a different form of interaction. So
Yeah.
on a previous podcast a couple of weeks back, we alluded to this. We talked about the fact that GPT, other um, models, by default, their default is sycophancy. So you wind up with talking to that all day, and then you wind up talking to humans very infrequently. You
Yeah.
might get kind of bad at
Humans. How boring.
it. Yeah.
So what do you actually do about it? How do you keep these rarely used skills warm without turning development into like a whole second job?
Yeah, you got to make a conscious effort. And actually, this is one of the reasons why in my company we've designed the programs in the way that we have, because the goal is to get people doing a little bit of like 10 minutes of practice a day, in order to be able to keep all of the durable skills muscles that they need in order to be able to do great work, keeping them fresh. So that's part of it. You need to spend you don't spend your entire life, right? But you need to spend a little bit of time
Yeah.
practicing it. just as you would, if you wanted to keep your French good, you'd spend a little bit of that, little bit of time practicing that. So there's that. You need to be doing that. You need to be doing it regularly. You need to be, it's like daily practice, ideally. And then the other thing is you just got to seek out opportunities. And I would say seek out opportunities as an individual. But if you're a team lead, then you got to start thinking about and mapping the durable skills that your team needs.
Yeah.
And then using projects, using other types of activities in order to be able to make sure that people are getting that experience. And so we've worked fairly extensively with leaders, with companies to say, okay, yeah, here's our programming, but here's also some consulting that we can do with you to help make sure that we're building this continuous skills practice into the day-to-day rhythm of work. And if you do that mindfully and consistently, then you're going to have a team that's going to be able to adapt and adjust to anything, even as the style of work changes.
And that's something to think about as work shifts to become more generalist.
Yeah.
You have to think about this and have a plan, kind of, right?
Yeah. My
where to double down.
Yeah, precisely. I mean, two things are happening at the same time, right? It's like, yes, work is becoming more general, but also work has this capacity now to sort of shoot off in different directions, right? This thing we had that really began when GPT 3.5 hit and kind of changed how everybody worked, something else is going to happen, right?
Yeah.
And we're going to have to change how we work again. Yeah. So creating a workforce that is highly adaptable, highly resilient, but then also has these other sets of really highly defined soft skills is generalist enough to be able to move from one spot to another is going to be an enormous part of the future workforce.
Yeah. Well, good stuff. Great episode, Paul. See you next time.